What was it like to have lunch with Bill Gates?
Spicy. Took off really quickly. Got over 100 users in our first day, and we technically went on a 0 to $1 million in revenue journey quicker than Amazon. Peter Jones from Dragon's Den, Jacqueline Fuller, Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, Richard Branson called from Necker Island, and then an investor pulled out.
Don't do anything until money's in the bank.
It's obviously a very tough venture capital market.
Venture capital is not the only option.
Only raise venture capital if you are building a venture scale business. Even if I think of WeFarm, and at our peak we were on a pretty close to hyperscale growth journey, thousands of users joining a day, and we still didn't hit escape velocity. It's soul destroying at times doing investment rounds, all super hard. You just have to pick yourself off the floor. It can feel very one directional, but it's not. The single biggest piece of advice you could ever give an entrepreneur is just...
Welcome to another weekly episode of Strategy and Tragedy, the show that spotlights the highs and lows of scaling and failing in business. I started this show after working with over 100 founders and their scaling teams, and saw that entrepreneurship, even for the most level-headed among us, is a roller coaster. But this is not to put you off going into business. On the contrary, the purpose of this show is to help more entrepreneurs go into business with their eyes and ears wide open, so they stand a greater chance of success with their future unicorn. To hear more about the philosophy behind Strategy and Tragedy, I strongly recommend you bookmark episode 0, which says start here to listen to straight after this episode. For now though, I am so excited to interview my next guest, Kenny Ewan, the director at Nesta's Mission Studio, which is the venture studio tackling impactful solutions for the UK's most pressing problems, from obesity to climate change. Kenny is a highly experienced entrepreneur who led WeFarm from idea stage to become the world's largest farming network with over 3.5 million users, 120 employees, and $35 million in venture capital. Kenny, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. Good to be here.
Amazing to have you. So let's start off with Nesta. Tell me more about the Mission Studio that you're working on.
Yeah, so Nesta started developing a venture studio a couple of years ago to build bespoke startups in-house to tackle the three big missions on the UK's most pressing societal challenges. So around obesity, decarbonisation, particularly in the home and heat pumps, and a fairer start in bridging the attainment and education gap for disadvantaged young people. Over the last couple of years, there's been a partnership with Founders Factory to build those startups with Nesta's mission expertise, and now Nesta's bringing that in-house. So we're going to build all the startups ourselves within a Nesta Mission Studio, and I've joined to lead that, and over the next 2 years, spin out 8 startups focused on those big mission areas and also being financially sustainable.
Exciting. And what's Nesta's background? Is this the home energy company I'm thinking of?
No, so Nesta's the UK's innovation agency. Started in the 1990s, kind of close to government as a bit of a government think tank, has morphed over the years into one of the UK's biggest independent charities. So a big organisation now with a big endowment, and spends all its time really focused on these big societal challenges, and takes what it calls a multiple shots on goal approach to that. So it does policy, research, a lot of data science, grant giving, impact investments, separate to what we do at Mission Studio. And I guess Mission Studio is the latest shot on goal to try and tackle some of these big challenges.
Exciting. And what's your role?
So as director of the studio, I guess a few different things, but primarily I'm there to be an institutional co-founder, to work alongside our team as we create, design, ideate startups that could potentially tackle one of those 3 big areas. We take that all the way from idea to, through the sort of traditional startup 0 to 1 process. If it feels like an idea that could scale and we have some validation for, we hire in a founder and then partner with them over a few months, give them some investment, and hopefully the goal for us is to then spin it out as an independent startup that's going to be successful in multiple different ways, mission and profit, and we take an equity stake in return for that.
Mm-hmm. Makes perfect sense. I love that. I feel like you've got your elevator pitch nailed as well. That was very succinct.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah, I love
3
it.
months in.
Are you allowed to talk about any favourite projects you're working on at the moment?
So really we're in that transition between the partnership with Founders Factory and into the in-house version in Mission Studio. So we haven't started our sort of next portfolio, but we have a few absolutely outstanding startups through that first portfolio. 8 great startups that have already spun out of the studio, and everything from tackling heat pump installation and working with installers and really encouraging people to get more heat pumps into their houses, through to consumer-facing products that are working with speech and language language therapy and helping young kids that have speech difficulties to get the treatment that they need.
Amazing. I love that. So this is only this year. So this is a fairly new position for you.
It is.
And the headline in your bio is WeFarm. So if we go chronologically kind of backwards, how long ago was it that you closed the WeFarm chapter?
So it's now, I mean, guess coming up for 2 years since we went into administration, and we sort of half sold, half closed the business. And yeah, it took a few months to entangle all of that. It took a few months off after almost a decade-long roller coaster, as you said, in entrepreneurship. So it feels much closer, but it's almost 2 years now.
So what I'm really curious about is after your decade-long roller coaster, as you call it, with WeFarm, which again we will get into, the past few years you mentioned kind of dabbling in lots of different things like coaching, being part of these venture studios. What have been some of the most obvious patterns, the most obvious commonalities?
Definitely some common challenges. I mean, I think the most common thing I ever see is people just taking on too much, not being focused enough. I mean, definitely something I've made the same mistake in multiple times through, the WeFarm journey and others. But, people who are building 3 business models or, trying to appeal to 6 different user types at the same time. I think the single biggest piece of advice you could ever give an entrepreneur is just to focus and just get one thing right. That old 100 people love you rather than 100,000 kind of like you.
Right.
Advice. Yeah.
I love that. And so just to stick with that for a second, because I definitely relate, and I'm sure many of our listeners do as well. So what's the advice that you give? Because obviously it's one thing to say, you need to focus, you need to prioritize, but when you're in this position where you have the freedom coupled with the pressure and the risk, it's a hard decision to say, okay, this is actually what we're going to focus on. So what can you speak to in terms of specifically like how to prioritize, how to make those decisions on where to focus?
Yeah, I mean, it's super hard. Very easy to say, very hard to do, as you say. One of the things that we ended up doing at WeFarm was being very strict with ourselves in terms of goals, and almost that kind of pre-mortem style of idea of, halfway through the quarter, when inevitably we're not meeting 3 of our goals, which are the ones we're going to drop, and almost have that conversation up front and say okay, let's not set them then, let's just have this one goal. And it was, a remarkable insight for me of, even when we were a company of more than 100 people, trying to do anything more than one thing at a time was still super hard, even though you think it's going to be much easier. So I think that kind of thing of being very strict with yourself of what is a nice to have, and I'm going to end up 3 weeks from now dropping it anyway, so why waste time in the meantime? I think also giving yourself permission as a founder not to have to please everyone. So saying something consumer facing, think about the adoption curve. There's only ever going to be a tiny percentage of people that want your product now, and actually onboarding people who don't is only going to be disadvantageous for both of you. They're not going to be happy. You can come back and win those users 3 months or 2 years or 10 years from now. So concentrate on that subset. They're going to want your product as it is now, and that kind of fits. So again, it's about being strict with yourself, giving yourself permission almost to fail in advance, and not concentrate on those things. For me.
Yeah, I think you noticed my face light up when you said pre-mortem. That was such a magic word for me, because it's something I've been talking about, something I'm going to write a bit more about as well, which is like, do that, as morbid as it sounds, like do the pre-mortem before it's too late. It's just a really helpful mindset shift. You mentioned kind of the adoption curve there. So in terms of helping busy founders that have got never-ending to-do lists, customer first, again, another sort of buzzword, would you kind of say that's, your early adopters, that's what you need to use to follow as like your North Star to streamline that long to-do list?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like this, again, it's hard, and there's so many different types of businesses. It's hard to give one rule for things. But I think, if you think about funnels and getting people at the top of the funnel that are likely to use your product long term, I think a lot of founders kind of make the mistake of trying to please everybody and actually broadening their funnel too much. And it's perfectly fine for people not to like your product as it is now, especially if it's scrappy and version 1 and all those again buzzy startup terms. If I think, for example, at WeFarm, when we launched our marketplace and we had software for our retailers to start joining and be the kind of focal points for the retail, the software was rubbish. It was really, really bad, and it only appealed to 5% of retailers who kind of really got the value proposition, but that was okay, right? And I think it was one of the things we had to talk to our sales team about all the time, as they would go in and say, this retailer doesn't want it, what are we going to do? And I said, that's absolutely fine, let's put them into a list of, come 6 months from now or 12 months from now when it's version 3, let's only find those ones that really love it. And that it works from multiple points of view, because you're then not having to panic and iterate your software too quickly. You have ones that really get the value proposition, and you can add, then broaden that funnel as you add. The two things almost happen simultaneously, or in parallel rather, where you broaden your funnel and deepen your product. So, it's really hard, I think, for founders to say no to a potential customer. But again, I think it's about that being strict, and let's get the customers that really love us and will value the product as it is now.
Yeah, very wise words. Thanks for sharing that, Kenny. Any other commonalities? I feel like I jumped in on that one to just hone in on the focus piece.
I mean, there's so many. I mean, one of the big things we're seeing now is obviously a very tough venture capital market where, a lot of, especially early stage kind of pre-seed seed companies are really struggling to raise and raise on a dream and a promise the way they might have been able to, 2 years ago, which, I see so many founders struggling with at the moment. So many commonalities. It's actually amazing to me how many people go through almost exactly the same things as they build startups, hiring first team members, even simple things like what sort of software do we use for this, or how do we create an MVP? It seems that almost everyone struggles with this.
Yeah, it is amazing, right? Like, this is also where it's coming from. I mentioned in my intro, I have a vast array of data points when it comes from my own business before. I'm also VC scout for Ada Ventures. I have a few different hats and just kind of, I have quite a strong network. So just kind of from all of those different vantage points, they all accumulate. And it is, I completely agree, it is amazing. I mean, the brain is just fantastic at pattern matching anyway, but you're completely right. The same challenges, the same obstacles come up over and over again. So that's also, I just want to use this show as a platform to kind of spread that message and stop people making the same mistakes. On the venture capital piece, you're saying everyone's kind of struggling with that as well. Just to touch on that too. Venture capital is not the only option. You, of course, raised over 35 million for your previous business. What advice are you giving founders in terms of fundraising at the moment? Are you kind of saying actually there's other routes to securing capital?
I mean, for sure there are. And I think, again, it feels like almost the oldest cliche in the book, but, only raise venture capital if you are building a venture scale business. But I think it's still good advice because there's a lot of founders out there who think it is the only path.
Yeah.
But, increasingly, I think a lot of founders are looking at grants, especially if you're building something in the more mission focused space. It's a really great route potentially. Not all grants are equal. Crowdfunding, there's lots of different routes to it, but I think the biggest advice is to be super lean, to really concentrate on those, initial goals and metrics that are going to help you to raise. I think it's almost back to basics on fundraising. The kind of years where you could put together a deck and raise 2 million are over for now. I'm sure they'll come back in some stage. But I think it focuses you in on really, getting those first 100 customers, showing that you can generate some revenue. But definitely, I think core advice is be much leaner on runway and burn.
Yeah, it is fascinating how intertwined being a tech startup founder and venture capital, it's just, when I first got into this world, I was like, it feels like it's such an automatic connection. There doesn't seem to have been much conversation or consideration between the two. But again, with my lens through Ada Ventures, I'm really seeing your point on what it takes to be a venture scale business, and it's a minority. It's not just for like any ambitious tech business that has the potential to go far. It's for a subset of even that type of business. So that has been overly glamorized.
For sure. And I think I totally agree with your point. And I think it's, they possibly started, back in Silicon Valley in the 70s or 80s, they were much more naturally intertwined. I think as startups has proliferated, everyone has a startup now. And I think that match with venture capital and a VC. So I think there's now maybe more of a forced relationship between a lot of that. But I mean, even if I think of WeFarm, and at our peak, we were on a pretty close to hyperscale growth journey, thousands of users joining a day, I mean, at our peak, we were having more content contributed to Wikipedia on the average day, and we still didn't hit escape velocity.
That's
we
insane.
Still missed that curve for a kind of network platform. And that to me is like, you're a subset of the subset, the velocity you need to really return tens of millions of venture capital is so big.
Wow, that is insane. That does put it into perspective. As I said, I already had kind of an idea, but hearing about WeFarm and that hyperscale, and even then, it was still not that venture scale. That's insane. All right, we'll get into WeFarm because I feel like we've been teasing it for a while. I also noticed a bit of a reaction from you when I was talking about the 35 million you raised at WeFarm. What was that? reaction about?
Yeah, especially in this market, it seems kind of ludicrous that we managed to raise that amount of money. And I'd never done anything. I wasn't from a tech startup background. I'd mostly built fish farms in Latin America up until I started a tech startup. So yeah, it just seems to be quite incredible that we managed to do that. But
it also is like, I guess those numbers are just like not even real, right? It's like,
yes,
35 million. Like if we filled this room full of that cash, like what would it even look like?
That'd be nice. Should we try that?
Should we roll around in it?
I'd probably go to some VCs though immediately, but yeah, no, I mean it was an absolutely crazy roller coaster, and I'm very proud of what we achieved at WeFarm. A huge number of lessons learned, but no regrets.
Yeah, amazing. All right, so did you start the business? So you started the business. You got this Google prize. That sounds cool. What's that? Do they still do that?
Yeah, I think they do actually. It was my first ever pitch, and it was on stage with Peter Jones from Dragon's Den, Jacqueline Fuller, who was like head of Google Europe or Google X at the time, Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, all there on stage. There was lights and cameras.
Wow.
And, I think I was the 6th out of 10 people to pitch in this final, and I think 3 of the first 5 kind of froze on stage, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my, and I don't remember anything about the 2 minutes that followed, but we ended up winning, and I got this big check. Richard Branson called from Necker Island to award the winner. I know, right? So that this sums up the roller coaster, but that's where it all started.
How much of that do you think was luck, being in the right time, right place?
Oh, I mean, a fair amount of it was luck. We'd applied the year before and got nowhere. Didn't even make it to like the first round of whatever.
See, this is what's important to share on the show, Kenny.
Right.
Is like someone like me would hear that story and be like, that sounds so easy. Go and apply to this Google Prize thing and like pitch to Peter Jones. But actually, you applied the year before and didn't get it.
Exactly. And then we saw it come up the next year, and we're like, oh, we have one just lying around. We may as well just stick it in again.
Cool.
So we stuck it in again and ended up becoming the overall winner. So a lot of luck. I mean, some work in the pitch, definitely. But
yeah, of course. Congratulations. So that was the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And then what was the next kind of big milestone in the business? Was it then kind of getting fundraising or hiring your first 10 people? What was the next kind of big...
I think for us it was much more product based. So at that point we had a kind of proof of concept. We had a bootstrapped prototype that was basically running off a dongle and a tiny laptop, and we'd use that to test with farmers and see the reaction. But when we won the Google Prize, we set it up as a business, went out and built a first real version of our product, a kind of version 1.0, and started getting that into farmers' hands. And it took off really quickly. I think we got over 100 users in our first day, and and it started to take off really quickly. I think we did. The ethos of WeFarm was to be very much peer sourced and about people's knowledge and information in a world that was very top down. The traditional charity approach is very much farmers just needed to be told what to do, and we came with something very different, and I think it hit a nerve.
Yeah, and on the 100 users a day, that very rapid adoption, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the way the product was developed sort of lent itself to that network effect anyway, because it is a messaging system, right, to connect farmers. So if they're sharing their knowledge, it's that easy adoption, right? The zero CAC, I imagine, in that process.
Yeah, I mean, pretty close to zero CAC. I mean, I think our CAC for a long time was about 30 or 40p a user.
Wow.
This is what, venture capitalists got very excited when we had the sort of unit economics we had and such like. But yeah, I mean, we had to push the network effect. I mean, it sounds easy in hindsight, 100 users here, but there was days where we'd only get 1 or 2, and it gradually took off. But we had to build that network effect very, very manually. And I think, again, that's a message for founders. Like, again, it always sounds very easy of just users join, but in the early days you have to push the boulder up a hill and be prepared to do that. Yeah,
you're very much creative your own destiny, haven't you? Got to kind of drive that. So do you remember any of those like tactical things that you did to spark the fire a little bit?
Yes, I mean, we scrapped around with all sorts of pretty local solutions at the time. So we'd go out and visit. We were largely East Africa based, so a lot of our farmers were there. We would go out to kind of farming unions or cooperatives. We ran competitions. I remember one we ran with local kids, kind of high school kids, and gave them. You said we'd give a prize to the one that signed up the most farmers in a day and things like that. And some things worked and some things didn't. We learned a lot of lessons over the years, but it was that kind of scrappy methodology that I think it got the ball moving. And I think with a network effect business, once it's moving, you can then really lean into it. But it's those early days where you have to get that critical mass.
Yeah, exactly. What's it called where you rub those two sticks together? Is it like getting the kindling?
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to remember. Yeah. This is like
like that.
The term that comes to mind.
day.
Yeah, on a rainy day.
Yeah.
It's the perfect analogy for founder life, especially in those early days. But no, I get it. And especially if you've got a product that leans itself to that and you lean into it, and then hopefully that uphill boulder then turns into a snowball. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know, that may be a bit of a mixed metaphor, but
exactly.
On a very sunny day.
Yeah.
And it did for us. I mean, that was, and again, there's luck in that, and hopefully some skill at some point. But yeah, we got to the snowball relatively quickly, I think.
That's amazing. Okay. And then when did VC come into how many rounds did you get the 35 million? What was that process like for you?
150 it feels like, but it was actually for, so that was through 2015, and we got to about 4,000 or 5,000 users in our first year, and it was starting to take off, and we then raised our first VC round in early 2016, which was led by Local Globe, which I think WeFarm always had this kind of benefit and curse where we only really appealed to the top tier VCs, which is great if you get the top tier VCs, but it means it's much harder to get. So you're not. I had a lot of conversations with VCs who'd be like, "We're looking for moonshots. What are you doing?" And I'd explain that we were doing this SMS based system with farmers in Africa, and they just kind of look at me and be like, "I was thinking more of a note taking app. Like do farmers take notes?" So, a lot of VCs are much more conservative than people think they are. They all like to think they do moonshots, but very few of them do.
Right.
So, yeah, we were only ever appealing to a subset of VCs, but Local Globe, probably the best seed fund in Europe. Statistically, they are the best seed fund in Europe. So it was amazing for us to get that validation. We raised just over $1 million in a kind of pre-seed round with them. And that really put us then on obviously we could then hire, develop the products, really start to lean into it and go. And then we raised a much bigger seed round in Silicon Valley that was led by True Ventures.
Wow.
Yeah, who are probably the best sort of seed investor in the world. They were behind Peloton and Fitbit, and I think just after they invested in us, they had 5 billion plus exits in a single year. But that was truly game changing, and the perception in Europe of this weird little startup that had suddenly raised a seed round in Silicon Valley with a brand name VC. I had people calling me up, offering me term sheets where 2 weeks before they'd be like, "No, go away." It was crazy, and we that's where we kind of almost hit the peak of buzzy startup.
Yeah.
And we appeared in some top 10 buzziest startups in the world thing. And, lunch with Bill Gates, and all started to go a little crazy for a while. So
did you actually have lunch with Bill Gates?
Curry, yeah.
Curry. Yeah. We have to talk about that.
Let's be curry. What do you want to know about the curry stuff?
Yeah, forget about Mr. Gates. What masala did you order? What was it like to have lunch with Bill Gates?
Spicy. It was great. I mean, it's he's very intense. You can totally tell how he got to where he is. He'd clearly been given a binder and all the people he was going to meet that day, and he'd clearly read it, and he asked you these like very intense questions. You're just like, oh, like that. And
Not like me.
He didn't really like WeFarm, so he thought it was kind of frivolous because they're very into it was the kind of Gates Foundation, and they're very into these very deep, approaches. And he thought, he's never liked the idea of kind of networks and lightweight stuff. So
wow,
yeah, it's kind of intense.
What did that do? How did you feel leaving that lunch? Were you bruised?
Oh, I mean, by that point, I think I was being enough investor pitches.
Skin thicker than an elephant at that
time,
point.
Yeah, I mean,
so whatever.
It felt like validation at the time, honestly, because I think very early, before we even really had a product and before the Google Prize, we talked to the Gates Foundation because they're very big in agriculture to kind of work with us and help us fund it. And they kind of laughed at us, to be honest, and told us to kind of go away. And this was silly idea. And even though Gates, Bill himself didn't love it, the fact that they'd gone from that to, we're going to fly this guy halfway around the world to come and brief Bill personally on WeFarm was kind of signs of how much we'd changed minds and progressed.
But it didn't affect you that he wasn't that complimentary of the business during the lunch? No,
to be honest, again, by that point, I think I'd been through 2 investment rounds. I think by that point I'd heard, we got 2 yeses from 2 of the best funds in the world, and that was great. And we had some great angels and such like, but we'd heard no 150 times. And this is the other thing I think for founders to understand is that, it's soul destroying at times doing investment rounds. I've had 4 investment rounds that went super successfully, 1 that ended up failing, but of the 4 that went well, they were all super hard. And all you need is one yes, but that takes a lot of no.
And this is also coming from you who raised during a different time. You were saying this is like 2015, 2016, so the climate is also quite different. So
climate different, but I would also, so we were also an impact business in a time before impact was cool, and we got a lot of skepticism from commercial
Just
VCs.
swings and roundabouts, really.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did you keep going? Like, do you have like a mentor, someone to turn to? How did you kind of pick yourself back up and keep going despite all the no's?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of mentors that have helped and supported me over the years. By that time, obviously, we had a team around at WeFarm and kind of sharing that burden, a little as founder and CEO, primarily mine. But you need good people around you as well. I think. Yeah, I mean, I don't really actually have great advice for this, because I think it just is. You just have to pick yourself off the floor. It's almost like a boxing match. It does feel like that at times in your fundraising. I definitely had days out in the road, when raising our Series A in Silicon Valley, for example, where you'd have, 8 pitches in a day, and 8 times you'd get yourself all psyched up to do it. And, I'm a bit of an introvert. I find that kind of thing hard and draining, and you have to bring that freshness, like I haven't heard 6 other no's today, to the floor, otherwise you're defeated before you start. But I'm not going to lie that it's easy. It can be super hard, but again, it's just you just need one yes. That's all it takes.
Okay, so on the subject of tough investors, what happened with the final round?
Yeah, I mean, there's long stories behind that. I think WeFarm, after the sort of hyper growth journey where we banged through 1 million users and into the millions of users and huge amounts of content, and we built our business model around a marketplace for those users, and being able to buy their agricultural and eventually other products through us, and in many ways that took off spectacularly as well. I mean, I think we technically went on a 0 to 1 million in revenue journey quicker than Amazon, which did not end the same way, but yeah, I mean that was, we already had a network, and the marketplace was huge. We got to about $1 million a day in revenue, fairly quickly, but the margins were super tight. It was a difficult world in rural Africa. There's no last mile delivery. Every sort of piece of money we made, we ended up giving away to kind of financial transaction fees and all the other, things that are hard about that. So that was a struggle for us in terms of the margins. And I think, the venture capital world was changing. I think people's desire to plug, 5, 10, 15 million into, just that scaling journey of little revenue at the time for a lot of Future One was becoming a lot harder. So there was a lot of background in the business. I think we all felt we were still doing really well. We'd kind of set up an investment round. It was all starting to come together. We felt like we'd got the next 2 years of the business secured, and then an investor pulled out, which was pretty dramatic. We weren't expecting it at all. They offered us only a small percentage of the money they originally had, which meant the whole round fell apart. And it was a sliding doors moment, and we'd had ones that went in our favor previously, and this one went against us, but it essentially meant the business was on the edge of trading insolvently, very close to the edge. Within 24 hours, we went from next 2 years secured to, oh dear. And that was, indeed. And that was a really hard moment within the company. Obviously, we had to tell our whole team that this was happening. Receivers ended up coming into the business, and they managed to sell, part of it, but it was pretty dramatic. Yeah.
Wow, Kenny, I kind of feel like I feel the punch as you recount that. It's kind of sickening in that, like, fuck, like, just when you think you've gone through the worst of it and it's hard enough already to be raising venture capital, to then get a term sheet pulled at the last minute, which I mentioned to you before. To me, it's been quite shocking how many times that's actually come up on the show. The amount of VC-backed founders who have had the deal pulled from them at the last minute. Like within, I don't know, you said 24 hours. Was it kind of a day out from the date that it was supposed to close, or how close was it exactly? Do you remember?
No, I mean, I don't think we had a full closing at that stage. I think it was just 24 hours in terms of us thinking it's all done to it all changing. It was just a bit of a crazy day. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think even back in 2015, 2016, I remember this was almost being talked about as a thing of the past, where VCs were now much more professional and respectable, and this wouldn't happen. But it still is, and possibly even more now. And we had a startup in Mission Studio that in a pre-seed round had a term sheet pulled about 48 hours from closing from, I won't name them, but a brand name VC that you will have heard of, which I was appalled, to be honest, but it's still happening. So yeah, message to founders, like, no celebrating until money in the bank. It's got to be the rule.
Yeah. God, even that as well. This is like, even doing these interviews and hearing these stories, I'm like, even I'm feeling like the punches. I'm just remembering also, I was at an amazing like panel event with another like founder interview, and they'd made that you just saying about, not doing anything until the money's in the bank. they went out and hired a team and started investing in products and everything, thinking the money was coming, and then it all kind of fell flat. So lesson to people, don't do anything until money's in the bank. It is shocking. It is so wild how much this has happened. I mean, this is what's currently live. This number won't be the same because we do these quite far in advance. But today, as I'm sat here, I think that there's 20 something episodes that have gone live. And within those 20 episodes, bear in mind, not every single founder is a venture-backed tech founder. Yeah. But I've heard that story of a term sheet being pulled at least 3 or 4 times, which is more, when I first heard it was like, oh, wow. That was really unlucky. That was so shocking. But now it's come up more and more. It's like, oh, what's going on here?
Yeah, and I think, there has been a proliferation of VC and startups over the last, 5 years. It's obviously gone crazy. And with that, I think comes, I wouldn't say unprofessionalism, but, there's obviously a lot of VCs who don't have a lot of experience. And I think, I would say it's still very rare for tier 1, brand name VCs probably don't behave like this. And if you have a term sheet from a tier 1 brand name VC, you're probably pretty safe. It's kind of market suicide for them to pull term sheets and such like. But you now have such a long tail of VCs, and a lot of them have come from different worlds, especially in Europe. Very few of them are founders or come from the entrepreneurship world. They almost all come from the finance world.
Yeah.
It doesn't make them bad people, but it does make them disconnected from the startup ecosystem, I think.
Yeah. I wonder whether there's a bit of overexcitement in the mix there, is kind of what I'm reading into what you're saying. And then I wonder whether there's a communication piece as well. Like I've worked with a founder who thought the money was coming in, but from the VC's perspective, they were like, no, we were just talking. So there's maybe an element of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely
or not looking at your face.
Definitely miscommunication. I think you're right, though. I think although these things can have horrific effects for startups, they don't come from a bad place. Yeah. I think it's VCs who then have problems of their own, drawing down that money from their investors and LPs and such like, or it's somebody who can't quite convince their partner of something they thought they were going to convince their partner of. So I don't think it's coming from a bad place.
Yeah.
But I think the only advice you can give a founder in this circumstance is also do your background on VCs, ask to speak to other startups that they've invested in or spoken to. They're selling you as well, so it can feel very one directional because they have the money, but it's not. And something else I was going to say, I can't quite remember what it was, but yeah, definitely do that background check. Any good VC should be able to introduce you to other investors that they've invested.
Yeah, nice, fantastic. Kenny, thank you so much for your time. Time always flies on these interviews. I always love kind of deep diving. This is a wonderful kind of research project for me too, and lots of learnings that have been shared with our listeners. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you have learned something, you're taking something away, whether you're building your next startup or if there's something that's really resonating with you on your journey at the moment. Kenny, closing traditional question. I can't believe I'm saying this because I feel like I want to ask you like a million more things. But closing traditional question is, the show is called Strategy and Tragedy because one of the beliefs is often the best lessons can come from the biggest mistakes or tragedies, so to speak. You've had your fair share of tragedies in your entrepreneurial journey. What's been one that you haven't already touched on that's taught you an unforgettable lesson?
Yeah, I think WeFarm was obviously the sort of biggest one in recent years for me. I think I'd go back to, I think almost I've had 3 big failures in life that have all led to then the next thing for me. And I'll go back to really my university course, and I studied architecture.
I was wondering this. Sorry, I was going to ask you before, but I was like, wait, didn't you even study architecture? Yeah, that's cool.
And I was not very good at it. I think I forced myself to a degree, which I'm very glad about, but it was clear very early that it wasn't for me, and it's all I'd wanted to do for a long time, and it felt like a huge failure at the time. I guess it was in some extent because I came out with absolutely no idea what came next. But I escaped to South America for 6 months to help an NGO build some construction projects. Ended up staying there for 7 years. Found my way into a completely different world. Found stuff that I was passionate about, and that ended up becoming, a future career step by step into tech startups and building big mission driven things that all came from that experience. But it's been one of a number of failures that have all felt hard at the time, but all came out and taken me somewhere new and different. So embrace it, lean into it.
I love that. They will build up to a bigger picture. You might not see it in the moment. In the moment you feel like it's all catastrophic, but actually it's another step in the journey, isn't it? I love how poetic as well. You studied architecture and then you've gone off to build businesses. So yeah,
Indeed.
Fantastic. Kenny, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to sit down with you.
Thanks, Steph. Thanks for having me.
Really grateful. And thank you so much for listening. Really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Episodes are weekly, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hopefully see you next time. Thanks a lot.